Auzubillahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. This is lecture number 5 within the Prm700, the Advanced Project Management of MSPM program that you're enrolled in. We talked about the PM processes and the framework in the last lecture. The same concepts would continue to be pursued in this particular presentation. We talked about the project, the program, and the project management. We talked about the life cycle of the project. We also talked about the initiation to the closure phase. Within an important thing to remember is 5 is really considered the magic number in project management field of study. A lot of things will be 5, and the 5 processes or the 5 phases of the project life cycle also go on the same theme. The 5 phases of the project were the initiation, the planning, the implementation and the execution, the monitoring and the control, and then the closure phase of the project. The importance and the interrelationship between the 5 phases was also talked about in a lot of detail in the last lecture. If you remember those little bubbles, initiation leading to the planning phase going on to the implementation and execution, monitoring and controlling going hand in hand. If you see variances or any changes arising during that monitoring and control phase, you go back to the planning phase, and then the cycle continues. Once everything looks good and is acceptable to the customer and your project organization, you tend to move towards the closure phase of it. I also try to tell you about a situation where during the initiation phase, your customer sees some issues within the charter document, what you have captured in that document, during the dialogues that you and your organization had with the customer or the project sponsoring organization. The customer or your own project organization can decide not to proceed with the project. In that particular situation, when you're dealing in the initiation phase or dealing with the processes of the initiation phase, you can actually go down to the closure phase. So there could be a dotted line between the initiation phase and the closure phase. And the closure phase would include closing out of some of the resources, the laptop, the desktops, the phones, or any human resource that were actually brought in to support you with your project. So that is probably the only situation where you can go from the initiation to the closure phase. But during any phase of the project, there could be a situation where you can decide as an organization to go or not to go ahead with the project. In that case, closing phase is always the phase that has to be quickly dealt with in any of those situations. So one is the normal movement going into the closure phase. A sign-off is needed from every phase, movement from every phase to another phase. So there's a mutual understanding that the project is progressing at the right pace. No matter what phase the customer or your project organization decide not to progress further, the closure phase activities need to be dealt with at that point in time. Let's reiterate with this particular slide about some concepts about project management. It comprises a set of interrelated processes and tools ranging from simple to complex, and is based on the accepted principles of management used for planning, estimating, and controlling work activities with a view to developing specifically defined outputs that are to be delivered by a certain time to a defined quality standard and with a given level of resources, so that the project goal and outcome and the benefits are realized. Effective project management is essential for the success of any project, whether in the private or the public sector, and irrespective of its category, size, and complexity. So project management comprises of set of interrelated processes and tools, different techniques that are coming in. And we are generalizing all methodologies that are out there. Whenever you see the need for effective and efficient implementation of processes to get to your desired output in a given amount of time frame, monitoring the level of budget that has been provided, and monitoring the activities of the resources that were given to you, and still trying to meet or exceed the original customer's requirement or need, you need to adopt project management. Management by projects treat many aspects of ongoing operations as projects in order to apply project management techniques to them. In the last lecture, we talked about the project life cycle. Just like the birth of any baby, you start off in the infancy stages and then move on. Your project life cycle are the 5 phases. In this particular slide, we're also going to come in terms with different terms and terminology that are used across the board for some of those phases. Initiation is widely used in the world of project management, but you also hear the word concept and feasibility. Again, you need to understand that the feasibility study should be done by your project customer prior to bringing the work to your project organization and ultimately to you, or hiring of you or assigning of you as a project manager. So it's a feasibility, the word feasibility here only draws line between the communication going on between the project organization and the customer organization, and making sure that after that communication there is still a need to pursue on with the project, and there is a mutual benefit to the customer and to your organization by the implementation or execution of this particular project. And mutual benefit doesn't always mean money benefit. We're going to talk about that in the next lecture or in the next few lectures also. The mutual benefit could also be getting your foot in the door by handling a project segment or a new technology that you are really interested in as an organization to work on, and this is a research and development opportunity that you have. So let's not always put money as a mutual benefit solution. The next phase is the planning. It is also called the development phase. Sometime during the planning phase, prototypes are developed depending on the need of the project. The next 2 are typically called the same name, whichever organization, whichever industry you're working in, but execution and implementation, meaning this is the time when all that is planned has to be executed, actually put on the paper, and now it's the time. In the planning phase it was put on the paper, and now it's the time to actually start working through those tasks. While you're executing, you're monitoring those activities, and that is the controlling and the monitoring phase of the project. You may come across different terminologies for these phases, The idea is that you will be able, by the definition of these phases that was given to you in the last lecture, you'll be able to put those activities in certain phase of a project. Every phase has to be done except of situations that were described to you in the earlier slide for successful completion of the project. The last phase is the closeout. I hate the word termination, but that is still a word used in many organizations. And then the finish of the project. So the 5 phases of the project constitute the project life cycle. The project management context, within it you use the little bell curve. For all the processes that were described in the earlier slide, you start off with the initiation. At the initiation phase, the need for resources and the cost is the lowest. Within the planning phase, you start to acquire a little bit more of resources, and in this situation you may be acquiring the services of people like consultants, subject matter experts, because one of the most important activities in the planning phase is the process of estimating. This will be the go-ahead signal for your project organization, the go-ahead signal for acquiring the right skill set and acquiring the number of the right skill sets for your project. And a lot of authority is needed on the project manager's side to actually continue with the estimation process. So once the planning is done, you slowly and gradually start acquiring more resources, and the resources peak. Whether it's the cost associated with usage of the resources and the project staffing, the peak is within the execution phase of the project. And obviously, if you notice, the control phase is right next to the execution phase. So execution and monitoring and control always goes hand in hand. There's a slow and gradual moving down from cost and resource perspective, finally coming down to the closeout phase. Within the closeout phase, it is the job of the project manager to assign resources, assign tasks during the planning phase, so that you will have the resources to execute the closure phase successfully. One thing that we as project managers tend to ignore is listing of all the activities that need to be done in the closure phase. And the issue arises later on when everybody is in a hurry to move on to different projects, move on to different activities, and there is nobody left behind for successful execution of activities in the closure phase. But the crux of the slide is that the whole bell curve takes peak from project cost and staffing perspective in the execution and the control phase. Human resource and project cost need is the greatest in the execution phase. For the Planning Commission of Pakistan, the project management life cycle is a little different, and we're going to use this as an example to talk about the different terminologies that are used for different phases of the project. PC1 is the preparation of the project. PC2 is the feasibility study. If you look at the outer crust, that is the phase that is given the name of identification and formulation. Then the appraisals and the approvals is the phase of actually giving the right authorities to progress, and it is also the start of provision of funding. PC3 is the monitoring and the controlling aspect of it. It's the implementation phase, the activation, the work cash plan. Okay. And then the PC4 is the closure or the completion phase of it. There is also a PC5 in here, which is the ex post evaluation. We call it the maintenance. For a program, there is a maintenance, the warranties and the guarantees. But for a project, at the closure phase, your project terminates or comes to an end. For the Planning Commission of Pakistan, there's a PC5, which is the annual operational report, verification of input, output, outcome and impact. So there is a phase given to your project or a program where some verification is going on, whether the intent of the project is met or not, or does it have end user acceptance. All that to some extent should be done in the project closure phases. So characteristics of those phases or the process group. Again, one thing to remember now is that within the PMI you will be hearing the word project phase, or you will also hear the terminology process group for each of those 5 phases. Each project phase is marked by completion of one or more deliverables, a tangible piece of work. If you're thinking of the word tangible, a document that has been put together as part of that particular phase. For the initiation phase, we use the term charter document, which is again a tangible piece of document with all the right information in it, and it also has a sign-off document. So each project phase should have a document that can be signed, so the project manager is given the authority to move on to the different phase or the next phase of the project. I shouldn't use the word different, or the word should be used is the next phase of the project. The phase end review. For every particular phase, there should be a phase end review which determines if the project should continue to the next phase. The exception being the implementation and monitoring and control, which are going hand in hand. And the tangible piece of documents within those phases will be your status report given to the customer and the sponsor on a regularly or predetermined interval. The characteristics of the project life cycle serves to define the beginning and the end of the project. Project life cycle, obviously, if you look at the bell curve, is collection of all 5 project phases. When we define a project phase has many processes within each phase. So we talk about the project life cycle. The project life cycle has the 5 phases going here, and each of the phases has processes within it. How do you define a process? A process are series of actions bringing about a result. Individual processes within a process group are linked by their inputs and outputs. Now we are diving into the more details. Project life cycle, phases, process. Each process has 3 things: inputs, tools, inputs, outputs, and in between the tools and techniques applied to get you from the input to the output. So each process is defined by the input, documents or documentable items that will be acted upon, tools and techniques, mechanisms applied to the inputs to create those outputs. And ultimately, we are all trying to get to the output, which are documents or documentable items that are a result of the process. So again, project life cycle, the 5 project phases, the processes within the phases, each process having inputs, outputs, and the tools and techniques that are applied to produce that output. There are many processes, and we'll actually give you a number in just a moment. Some are called the core processes. So each phase has many processes. Some are called core processes. The word core will be mandatory, have to be done. They have clear dependencies that require them to be performed in essentially the same order on most projects. For example, if the processes are planning, estimating, development, testing, and so on and so forth, all these processes, the process of planning, the process of estimating, the process of development, then the process of testing, have to be done in a certain sequential order. And these are some of the processes that have to be done, whether the project is simple or complex, small or big, medium or bigger range. Then some are called the facilitating process. The facilitating processes are dependent on the nature of the project. They are performed intermittently as needed, but are not optional. So don't assume that facilitating processes can be omitted. They are not optional, but they can be done in different orders within the different phases of the project. And some of those examples will be the quality assurance process or the CCB meeting. The CCB meetings are the change control board meetings. Whenever there is a change and the change hits upon the constraints of meeting the time, the target, the intended scope or the budget, then that the sponsors and the high-level sponsors of the project organization and the customer organization need to sit down together and understand the benefit of it. And they would be the responsible or the authoritative group that will say, yes, go ahead, or do not go ahead with that particular change. The combination of those authoritative roles make up the CCB, which is the Change Control Board. So whenever there is a change that hits upon the constraints or turns on the red signal that your project, if that change is implemented, your project can get delayed or cannot meet the intended targets, then you will call upon the CCB meeting as needed. So the CCB meeting is a process which is a facilitating process and should be done and can be done multiple times or as needed. Next one could be sponsor reviews, and the list can go on. I can come up with several more examples, but I think that will be wasting your own time. I hope you understand the difference between the core process and the facilitating process. Assume that facilitating process is not optional. That has to be done, but can be done many times, or it can be done in different orders depending on the needs of your project. Core process, obviously, if you look at the example, has to be done in a certain sequential order. Obviously, you cannot test something out before you haven't even planned it or estimated it. As a project manager, you will come across a lot of project management standards. They will ask for different methodologies. They will talk about a particular methodology, whether you are educated in that, the relevant standards. So if I can put that into two groups, there is the one which is the off-the-shelf project management standards. Off-the-shelf project standards, and do not think that these are any low standards. These are big organizations, big industries who have come together or have put together the best industry practices. They have surveyed many organizations and individuals and professionals to come up with certain set of processes and procedures, and have put them all together in a methodology form that can be pursued and worked upon by other or the later project managers. So any organization which is coming up and you want to make use of a relevant project management methodology can actually go in, make a purchase, and they will see all of the relevant processes and standards put together in one place for them. Some of the examples will be PMBOK, Project Management Body of Knowledge, Prince2, which is a European, and we'll talk about the other, APM BOK, P2M, BS6079, Agile, the software process models, and again there are so many more that we can never fit them into a particular slide. Then comes in the in-house project management standards and methodology. Some of the bigger companies in the world who can actually invest in assigning resources to come up with a tailor-made solution for their products or services that they're offering. And they are going to take the best practices and the best solutions that exist in the market and implement and use them at their own discretion to ensure that they're not missing anything and they get the best of the both worlds. That means they are not overburdened by processes that may, according to their industry, may be, don't want to say not relevant, but not as relevant as others. Only bigger companies, bigger organizations who are investing heavily into the project management group can come up with their own in-house project management standards and methodology. These are developed in organization based on their own specific requirements, policies and environment, and may incorporate procedures and processes and tools and techniques from one or more off-the-shelf standards. So, in theory, they're going to get the best from using what is out there in the market for everyone to use to meet their own specific needs and requirements. The group which is considered the off-the-shelf will be the conventional type of methodology. The one which is tailor-made, obviously, is considered more of customized project management methodology. And you will see in the market that there is abundance of both situations. One thing to understand before I move on is an educated project management professional needs to understand and relate that no matter what methodology is applied, the concepts and the processes stay the same. So, if you are PMI qualified, you do understand the processes that are going on in the Prince2 situation or methodology. There may be some situations which would vary a little bit. However, an educated project manager would understand the processes needed to make the most of the resources that are provided to come up with effective and efficient implementation of the project. So what is project management methodology? We talked about that in the previous slide. From the definition perspective, a methodology is a framework of processes and tools tested on diverse projects. Some of the reputable international organizations for maintaining worldwide standards and certifications for project management are PMI, Project Management Institute. Their website out there is www.pmi.org. I would strongly encourage all of you to actually try to go in there and check their website out. At this point in time, they are the leading resource for providing project management guidance to the world. Some of the other names that I found that I thought I can include in that slide and that should be mentioned are Prince2. Basically, Prince2 is very famous in the European nations and in the Europe continent. But the Prince2 is projects in controlled environment. The letters are underlined of what constitutes the word Prince2. And then the IPMA, the International Project Management Association. And then the APM, the Association of Project Management. Again, one of the things that I would encourage you to go and do after the lecture is to go Google these sites and find out what they're all about. And once you dig a little bit deeper, you will find out, without even going and registering, without even obtaining any books, you will realize that some of the terms and terminologies, the lingos, are common across all of the platforms. So, no matter what methodology is being used, as a learned project manager and an educated project manager, you would have an understanding of all the processes that are going on within any methodology that is being applied to the project of your choice. The project management body of knowledge, PMI's guideline to managing projects. The Project Management Institute's body of knowledge, PMBOK, P-M-B-O-K, is perhaps the most widely acknowledged and popular project management standard in existence. It is the basis for the PMI's coveted PMP certification examination. If you have worked or have gone out and researched project management, at this point in time you already may know the leverage and the authority that PMI has in the world of project management. Currently, the PMBOK is in its 4th version, which was released in 2008. PMBOK offers a comprehensive and sophisticated best practices and process-based standards which can be applied to different categories of projects. At the heart of the PMBOK are the 9 areas of knowledge and the 5 process groups or the phases of the project life cycle, which find application over the project life cycle. We'll talk about these things in the next few slides, but underline the word 9 knowledge areas, the 5 process groups over the project life cycle. So what are those 9 knowledge areas? Project management knowledge areas, and again you have to distinguish the definition. So we're going to put in per the PMI, the Project Management Institute. These knowledge areas describe project management knowledge and practices in terms of its component processes. And subsequently, these 9 knowledge areas have a relationship to the 5 process groups, which are the 5 phases of the project life cycle. In the first or maybe the second lecture, we talked about having the key, standing in front of the car, and learning how to drive. 3 distinct things. 9 knowledge areas are the components of your car. The seats, where the engine, the doors, the hood and the trunk, the tires, and various components that make up the car. So the 9 knowledge areas are areas of interest where all the relevant processes are added, and it constitutes a project knowledge for a project manager. So what are those 9 knowledge areas? In the earliest slide, in the last lecture, we talked about several things that constitute a project. And we used terminologies like change management and deliverable management and communication management and several other things. And HR management. According to PMI and according to PMBOK, the 9 knowledge areas are project integration management, project scope management, project time management, project cost management, project quality management, project human resource management, project communications management, project risk management, and last but not the least, the project procurement management. From this point onwards, we will focus, and the way your curriculum has been set up, we will focus on these knowledge areas along with the project phases, and we'll try to come up with a balance of explaining the processes within the knowledge areas and within the project phases that it belongs to. So what's the relationship between these 9 knowledge areas and the 5 phases? Let me summarize a little bit when I talked about the project life cycle and the phases and the processes. On your right hand side are the 5 phases which constitute a project life cycle. Each of the knowledge areas are listed on your left hand side. They are related, or the link between the 9 knowledge areas and the 5 phases or the process groups. There are 42 processes which are considered either core process or facilitating process to successfully lead, execute, and implement a project, or monitor and control a project. So all these 5 phases, within those 5 phases, there are 42 processes that are required by a project manager to successfully execute and make sure that none of the process is ignored during the life cycle. What are those processes? If I take example of 1 or 2, on your left hand side you will see the 9 knowledge areas. A question you may have, if you notice that the numbers are 4, 5, 6 instead of 1, 2 and 3. And the reason is that these are the numbers associated with the PMBOK. 4, 5, 6. If you open up the PMBOK, you will understand what those numbers actually mean. Those are the chapters. So if I look at the initiation process, on the top most row, there are only two processes: developing of a project charter and identification of stakeholders. Developing of the project charter is within the knowledge area of integration management, and identification of stakeholder is within the knowledge area of communication management. Remember what I said about the initiation process. Project organization has minimum resource at this point in time. If you remember the little bell curve, the project organization may or may not have assigned a full-time project manager to this project at this point in time also. That possibility or probability always exists. There are business analysts or marketing representative that will be going out to the customer site and grabbing all the information, or through interviews, through sharing of files, or through sharing of data. However, and whatever kind of information that can be provided or obtained from or by the customer is gathered and put into a document called the charter document. A little bit of relationship between what was told. Every process or every phase has a tangible piece of documentation that can be signed off, and charter is that sign off or tangible piece of documentation in the initiation phase of the project. And then identification of stakeholders sometime may or may not go, or may not be part of the project charter itself. So only two processes out of those 42 processes are in the initiation process. Your planning phase has processes from every knowledge area. It has about 20 processes. Then implementation and monitoring and control has the rest. Your closure phase has two main processes. One from the integration knowledge area, which is closure of the project or phase, and one important process is from the project procurement knowledge area, which is closing of the procurements. This is all relationship with the subcontractor or the vendor that you may have used within the life cycle of the project. Do not assume that a process is a task. Okay? Initiation has two processes. Closure has two processes. The rest of the 38 processes are within the planning, execution, and monitoring phases of the project. I don't want you to feel overwhelmed by these situations, but we will talk about each one of these phases and the knowledge areas separately, so that we have an understanding as we move, or as we make progress and move forward. 9 knowledge areas, just as a summary and a reiteration, are on your left hand side. 9 knowledge areas according to PMBOK. The 5 process groups. The top row, the initiation, the planning, implementation, monitoring and control being one, and then the closure phase. And all together, the knowledge areas, the process groups are tied together by 42 processes. Remember, this is PMI dictated or the PMI version. So if I look at from what you had seen earlier, and if I look at what I see now, is the color-coded representation of the same concept that was given to you in an Excel format. So you had all of the knowledge areas, the processes, and the constituting the 42 processes within the whole knowledge areas and the project phases. This is the color-coded version provided to us by PMI, and it is from the PMBOK 4th edition. For all of you who are listening to me, I would strongly suggest that if you have access to a color printer, you make sure that you get yourself a copy and keep that in easy access. I would also recommend that you get a printout of this and put it in an area where it is visible for you to see on a daily basis. More visual context will give you give you a better understanding and memorization of some of these processes. At the end of the class, even when you're not trying to do so, you will remember most of the processes that fall within the knowledge area. If I focus on one of the knowledge areas, and assuming one of the bigger knowledge areas is the project integration management, the first row in the previous slide, the first process within the first phase of project initiation is development of a project charter. It is represented by a color code of a little gray. It's a gray color. The next in sequence is development of project management plan, and obviously that particular process lies within the planning phase of the project. Moving on to the third phase of the project, which is the execution phase, you also have one process out there from the knowledge area of project integration management. That is the direct and manage. Direct means providing direction and managing project execution. So that particular process of the knowledge area of project integration management falls in the phase of execution or implementation of the project. You see two processes within the monitoring and controlling aspect of the project life cycle. One process is monitoring and controlling of project work, and the next process is performing integrated change control. Let's reiterate for a little bit what we talked about in the previous slides. You remember the 5 phases and their interrelationship? We started off with initiation phase. In this, you're developing a project charter, which is a tangible piece of document. The customer signs up for that. You move on to the planning phase, again that bubble, one-way arrow. You go into the planning phase, and now you have development of a project management plan. Again, a tangible piece of document. Remember, every phase needs a tangible piece of document. So from initiation, you move on to the planning phase, development of a project management plan. There's an arrow that goes down to the third phase of the project, which is the execution phase, on your rightmost corner. And what do you see there? It's directing and managing project execution. You go down to the fourth phase of the project, and which is monitoring and controlling your project work. There's another process that goes on. While you're managing and monitoring your project activities, there would be a situation, or there could be a situation, of coming across a change. That process is performing integrated change control. This particular process can actually lead you to going back to the drawing board or to the planning process. Remember that little arrow that went back to the planning process? You go back, you do execute all that. And once all is said and done, you come down and you are in the closure phase of the project. And lo and behold, there is a process waiting for you there, which is, if you look at the topmost left-hand corner, right next to the initiation phase, is within the closure phase you see a process, color-coded gray, part of the project integration management knowledge area, is the closing of the project or closing of the project phase. Altogether, if you see, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 processes within the project integration management knowledge area, scattered across the 5 phases of the project. If I briefly before actually summarizing the activities, if you look at the different color coded, you will see different knowledge areas scattered all across this little picture. I cannot lay more emphasis on the importance of this particular slide than what I've already done. This is one way of showing you which phase each of those processes are laying. So the initiation phase has 2 processes. Next to it, closure has 2. Execution has 8 processes out there. Monitoring and control have about 10 processes. But the biggest bulk of it is under the planning, which has 20 processes out there. Some of those arrows would represent facilitating processes, but don't spend a lot of, or the core processes, but don't spend a lot of energy and time on understanding the relationships between these processes. The important thing is to know and understand the knowledge areas, the processes that lie within these knowledge areas, and then where do these processes lie in the project phase or the project life cycle division. Let's go back a little bit. The 9 knowledge areas, there are 9 knowledge areas on your left-hand side. The top row is the 5 process groups. Within it, there are 42 processes. This picture clearly represents all of that. So summarizing, what did we actually do within this lecture? The important thing to understand is in the last lecture and this particular lecture is the understanding of the fact that there are different phases in a project life cycle. The interrelationship between the 5 phases. Initiation going into closure, the exceptions, or any of the phases going into a closure phase, and these are considered exceptions. But there's a certain movement, there's a certain wave of going in, going out kind of movement between the different phases of the project. Why are we using different methodologies, and what's the use of it? These are best practices out there. And no matter what methodology you're asked to deliver upon, if you are an educated project manager or a project management professional, you do understand that no matter what methodology is being used, you actually do understand the processes that are required, the methods or the tools and techniques that are required to successfully initiate a project, plan a project, implement and execute a project. While you're in execution, you will be monitoring and controlling your project and successfully leading your project to a closure phase. And while you're moving across these different phases, you are developing a tangible piece of document in each of the phases that the customer gets to see, appreciate, and sign off, and authorizing you to move on to the next phase of the project. Within these, the 9 knowledge areas, according to PMI, are the components or the grouping of knowledge of project management. You need to know the listing of all those 9 knowledge areas, which is very important. Throughout the rest of the curriculum, this is how your whole curriculum is divided. So at the end of it, it will come in as a second-hand knowledge to you. You will know it. You do not need to memorize any of this, but I would again suggest that if you put this in a visible spot, and if you have an opportunity to implement some of those processes, you will know it automatically. It's a good thing to understand how many processes and where those processes exist. 60% of the time of a project manager, if it is spent on planning, then understanding the concept that 20 processes exist in the planning phase of the project. The project life cycle, the project phases, project knowledge areas scattered across the project phases, the 42 processes according to PMI across the project life cycle within each of the phases, the core process, the facilitating process, the different methodologies, the different knowledge areas are all core components that we talked about today in our lecture. Review this, revise this, so you develop an understanding of it. You have to look through these slides to understand the concepts before we move on to the next set of slides and lectures. I wish you all the best, good luck, happy reading, happy printing, and keep that in a visible spot for easy access. Allah Hafiz and goodbye.